John Byerly is the executive director of the Norcross Co-op. Shirley Cave is the director of the Norcross Director of Operations for the Norcross Cooperative Ministry. And Ellen is
Queen, yeah. I write grants and do case management, basically whatever else these two guys tell me.
Okay, so case manager, jack of all trades. And so I wanted to just kind of, in the same spirit of talking with JP last week, kind of talk to them as a follow-up to Sunday and preaching on Isaiah 58 and the idea of loving our neighbors in costly ways, loving those neighbors who maybe requires not just a little check or a little cash, but actually requires that we pour ourselves out in costly, sacrificial, humble ways for them. And so we're just going to kind of dive in and see where this takes us. So first off, let me just start with just asking a general question. When you hear the idea of loving your neighbors, or the command that is given in the Old Testament, which Jesus reiterates, which Paul says sums up the whole law of God, what do you think of? Like, and I'll just take each of you guys. Like, what do you think of when you think of love my neighbor?
Go first.
Well, I think what I think of is love our neighbor. Well, first of all, who is our neighbor would be my first question, and I think
that's such a good lead-in because I'm talking about that next Sunday.
You can pay me for that.
Yes.
No, and I think our neighbor is whoever God puts in our path, whether it be in our backyard, whether it be at the grocery. Whether it be, here at the co-op where we're working, I think our neighbor is whoever God brings to us in whatever circumstance that person is in. And that's where the loving gets hard. But I think he brings his neighbors from all different places.
I mean, I think we want loving our neighbor to be somebody who's easy to love, people we go to church with, people we actually know.
So your experience is people you go to church with are easy to love.
Well,
no, I'm kidding.
but people that are in the same, we have something in common with.
Okay.
And loving people that you don't at first glance have anything in common with is not easy.
Yeah.
Well, for me, I always reflect back on the story about Jesus when he healed the lepers.
Mm-hmm.
I was always amazed that only one came back and said thank you. And I've often wondered if that were me, I probably would have struck the other 8 back with the leprosy again, like, you ungrateful, how can you do? But, that's always just really stood out to me that Jesus, he asked where the others were, but he didn't do that. He didn't react like I would in a human way. So, for me, that just told me that basically what that spoke to me was I'm commanded to, if I'm going to be a believer and live this life, I'm commanded to love, even if someone doesn't love back or acts like they love back. I'm commanded to love even if it's certainly easy to love if we see the reward in it or the benefit that comes back.
Yeah.
But where it gets hard is loving that person that's hard to love. And my experience here is that we come in contact with a lot of people that are really, really hard to love. I'm not blaming, not accusing, but I see this as a spiritual problem. It's a spiritual battle that's constantly being waged, and we're in the middle of that. Yeah. So, of course, the person or the entity that's ultimately defeated, because we've read the end of the story and we know how it ends, he's still working because he wants to take as many people with him in defeat. Right. So if that's going on, of course, we're gonna, we're constantly gonna have that, thrown in front of us. Yeah, okay, all right, you want to do that? I'm going to throw some more hard to love at you. Let's see how Christian you are today.
Right.
And that's a real challenge.
Well, so then specifically for you guys, it's a segue into, neighbors are those who are set right in front of you. You have a unique ministry where those people are the hard to love people who are in really desperate circumstances, broken circumstances, more obviously broken than our own. And So what does it look like for you guys? Let's start personally, and this might be really hard because volunteer capacity here, right, as a caseworker.
Well, paid now.
Paid now, okay.
But was a volunteer for a number
Praise
of
God,
years.
yeah. So all of you have some sort of vocational tie to loving your neighbor. So what does it look like for you to do this during the day, but then how do you flesh out doing that in your own personal life, or is it so integrated that you can't even kind of separate that out? Can you give me examples of where you've maybe had to do this recently? How you're loving your neighbors in costly ways.
Well, I just heard a conversation on the phone. A lady on the phone didn't like the answers that she was getting. I was eavesdropping on one end of the conversation, but she got real, we'll use the term agitated. I could hear both ends of the conversation at this point. I mean, it was very, very difficult for the person on the phone to reiterate to the person. It's sort of like, y'all are a church, you're supposed to do what I tell you to do. Mm-hmm. And we're a church, we're responsible to God. We're responsible to be steward of His resources. And try to present that in a loving enough way, when the other person is just, like you said, desperate, and in this case, desperate and angry.
Yeah, okay. So really just the everyday interactions you guys have with people, just responding in kindness, respectfully, treating them with dignity, even when they're treating you without.
Very disrespectfully,
yeah. Sure. Okay.
We've all been fussed at
right.
by people on the phone.
Yeah, you have these expectations.
Yeah, the expectations. I think back to John's comment about the spiritual battle. The expectation is that because we represent churches, we're just supposed to give everybody what they want all the time, everything, and that's not how the Bible says you're supposed to love your neighbor.
Okay. All right. That might be one I want to come back to.
Okay.
So, I don't know, you guys, like, what's it look like to love your neighbor this week, maybe, or last week, in the last couple of weeks?
Are you talking about here specifically?
Well, here or in your
in
personal
general?
life. I mean, like I said, I know that there's so much overlap between, you don't really know.
Yeah, one thing I'm personally dealing with right now is finding out the neighbor that's hard for me to love is sometimes within my own family unit. And that can be very difficult when you're dealing with those kind of issues within the family unit. And I think kind of what Ellen said, when you're family, you're expected to act a certain way, do a certain way because we're family. But when you see the other person maybe not making the best choices and doing some things that are detrimental to themselves, that's where it's very easy to judge, I think, in your own family. That's where I'm having to find some way to balance that, okay, to give them what I feel like some wisdom and encouragement, but to bring the loving piece into that too. They're very hard to love sometimes.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point, because we could get thinking that the neighbor is somebody that's just crossing your path, like you said, but who's in front of our path more than anybody. And so family falls in the category of neighbor, I think, when we define it rightly. So that's really good.
I think one of the reactions I've had recently is very similar to what she's talking about, is with family, and it's like, seriously, I deal with this all day long, and I got to come home and deal with it all over again.
Yeah.
I mean, what, am I supposed to be the expert here just because I do this as a vocation?
Yeah.
Seriously, are you kidding me? And I get all wrapped up, and then I just have to go, yeah, I do. I do, because not only are they family, but they're family. Yeah. And it's like, yeah. So I get very convicted on that point as well, because it's really easy for me to just go, seriously, really? Can I get a break here?
I totally relate to that pastorally. It's like, I'm amazed at how I can have so much grace and patience for a grown man, and be kind and respectful to somebody who's just acting selfishly, immaturely. But then I come home to my, 6-year-old, 10-year-old, 14-year-old, and I have no patience for them to act like kids, but I'll let the 35-year-old act like a kid. So it is really, really difficult to do that. Like, that's my job, and then I come home and everybody's supposed to do what I want there, like no inconvenience, and so I can totally relate to that. Well, let's talk about just the ministry of the co-op, the people that describe a little bit, just maybe for those who wouldn't know in our church, maybe Shirley, you could just do this. Shirley's not feeling particularly well, so she's trying to speak up, but so bear with her. I'm trying not to make her talk too much. But just the clientele you get here, I think we all know that in Norcross particularly, there's this divide socioeconomically of Buford Highway where sort of the haves and the have-nots.
Correct.
Most of our folks, if they're in Norcross, are on the side of the haves. And I think sometimes we can forget, it's easy for us as a people to connect to Burkina Faso, where we're involved in missions, which is like the third poorest country in the world, and that breaks your heart. But we've got a lot of poor, struggling people right here in our neighborhood, so to speak. So tell us a little bit about the clientele you serve, what the local problem is, some of the numbers maybe that would be helpful for us to know, because I think there's a place that we are involved at some level at the co-op. I think there's maybe more of a place where we could do more.
This immediate area here in Norcross where we serve is a very low income poverty level. Many of the families who have children, we were just looking up some of these numbers the other day, in the local school systems, the free and reduced lunch number in the schools right around us is 90 and over.
90%.
So 90% and over. So the majority of the student body are on free and reduced lunches. And that, of course, is an income-based program. So the families that are in this community are already struggling. They're minimum wage workers, oftentimes, single mom, minimum wage workers, having to make those decisions, day to day. Do I pay the electricity bill? Do I pay the daycare this week? Do I take my child to the doctor? Do I pay the rent? Do I buy groceries? Do I go buy the school supplies that they need? So there's those kinds of decisions that our families are dealing with. And then if something happens, if the car goes out, if something really big happens, then they're just faced with disaster all the way around. They struggle just to make ends meet.
Yeah. Okay.
I'd like to address that. The biggest thing I've learned just in the past several months here is that being poor is expensive. It really is. It really is. And I'll give a couple of examples. If the type of clientele that we serve, a lot of times because of credit history, things like that, just a simple utility bill, the utility rates are much higher. The fees are much higher because of high risk. I saw a statement yesterday that a guy had. Now, this is from Extended Stay Hotel. And I looked at where he had been in for a month, and I looked at the bottom, and it was $1,280.
Right. Which you can get an apartment for,
you would
two-thirds of that.
You would think, but when you're in this type of situation where you're living day by day or week by week, and you're literally paying for a night, it adds up. Mm-hmm. But that's how a lot of people that's how they live, because maybe they don't have the resources, or they're to the point where they can't put the money together for the deposits. Again, the credit's bad, so they might not be able to get a lease in the first place. So you add all those things up, and it's expensive. Yeah. And that's all. It just kind of floors me, but it's true.
Yeah, and this is part of what perpetuates cycles of poverty. Is it's really hard to get out of it because you're always behind.